We're standing here inside Miami, Florida. We're inside somebody's home where there are multiple conditions that are completely unsafe. I talk a lot in our videos about doing things correctly. There are multiple conditions here where, in my opinion, there's a lot of life safety issues and a lot of major structural concerns. There were a lot of tie beams and structures that were not properly reinforced. There's a lot of structures that were just cut and not thought of, and I don't see how they're addressing it. All I see here is evidence that they've already started to reconstruct the home. So I want to walk through just some very simple things that I see right from the beginning that are a major red flag in regards to the construction that was done here, and this can lead to major failure in the event. And I always say the worst possible thing that someone can have is a false sense of peace of mind. And that is 100% what we see here. As you look through the house, some areas are already finished. It looks like it's, as far as the untrained eye can see, there's a lot of conditions that look like, wow, this house is gonna be beautiful when it's done. However, from a trained eye, there's many conditions or there's many situations that scream, this is a major red flag or there's a major problem here. There was no engineering done or the engineer's recommendations were not followed. So in this first opening that we see right here. Now we've done a lot of similar projects where we take an opening and make it much larger. And in order to do that, whenever you have a span over 8 feet, you are going to need structural reinforcement, hands down guaranteed. Now, what we're seeing here is a large opening. I'm assuming this is somewhere around 12 to 14 feet, just off the top, just from my eyes. And what I see here is a steel plate. That's the first thing. And we're coming with a steel plate. The steel plate is sitting on top of this column, and we're gonna get into this column and that steel plate in a second. They are missing a steel plate here, which let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they were going to do. And then there's another column here. Now, in my experience working in these kind of conditions, whenever we're introducing a steel plate, or just from basic construction experience, whenever we're doing structural reinforcement, what you have to consider is that the way that homes are built is one thing connects to the next. So starting from the foundation, we have a structural connection that goes into our columns or tie downs, that goes into our tie beam, and that's why we talk about straps and hurricane straps in Florida that grab the trusses, because from the foundation all the way to your roof, everything needs to be connected, not just one thing sitting on top of another. So I can see here they introduce a steel plate. The other side has stucco, so I cannot see if the steel plates are on both sides, or we call that sandwiching. What I can see is that at some point they cut an opening, and what I'm seeing is just a couple inches of reinforced concrete. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing a couple inches of poured concrete. Now, this concrete may look nice and pretty and smooth, but what I'm not seeing is that this cell is filled with concrete and rebar. So somebody came here, cut an opening, made it look nice and pretty, and I'll show you some other ones outside that are not so pretty. And now we have a steel plate that could be sitting on top of nothing. For all we know, this is all hollow block. Based off the construction that I've seen here, I do not think any recommendations were followed. A huge sign of an unprofessional company, especially when it comes to a tie beam, is if you look through the plastic, you see those metal rods, that is rebar. And the tie beam is all chewed up, which basically means what a professional would do is use a saw to cleanly cut the tie beam. Now, there is code that requires a minimum coverage of that rebar. So what happens is if we have our exposed rebar as we see here, and the outside has already had stucco applied to it, so they were potentially going to cover this up, that rebar, when it becomes exposed to the elements, it'll start to corrode. So when this rebar gets oxidized, it'll start to move and shift. And that's where you see in some of the buildings that are closer to the ocean, some old buildings, they spend a lot of money on repairing spalling. Now, this condition right here will speed up the rate at which the spalling will occur. So having this rebar exposed and not covered by concrete, it's almost guaranteed that this structure will start to fail and show signs of failure very soon. So you get a window company in here to install a window. Next thing you know, the window's cracking. They can't figure out why. It's because the structure was not properly reinforced. And they'll be able to tell that the structure was not properly enforced. And on top of that, they did not treat the rebar properly by making sure it's sealed. And this is just something that we see all the time with amateur construction, or people that are unlicensed, or people that are unknowing, or that just don't care. Another big concern is that whenever you have steel plates, they'll typically stop. At least all the drawings that I've seen, one of two things happen. Either they stop on the column, or the plates will actually get welded where one plate connects to another one, but it's usually dead center. This is already going past, so I don't even know if they're introducing an additional steel plate on this side. And then once again, the stucco's already been completed on the other side, so So I would heavily question if they are adding any steel or any reinforcement. Another big thing, as I talked about on this side over here, is that whenever you're reinforcing a structure, you know, let's just say this column looks like it was poured solid. Question is, what did they tie into? And in my experience, whenever we've had to beef up an opening, we've also had to beef up the footer. So on top of this whole structure in the dirt is a footer. And usually what we have to do in these cases of adding some additional reinforcement is we have to beef up the footer. So we basically have to cut all the way down into the ground on both sides, add about 12 to 24 inches of footing, and then that gives additional strength to this structure that they're reinforcing. However, I cannot say here, I do not see any work that was done on the outside, and I did not see any work on the inside that was done in order to reinforce this. Another big issue, and this is where we spend a lot of time talking about this as far as our company, is what's it going to look like when it's all finished. So in this case, we're going to have a nice finished wood floor, and the windows that are, and the window system that is going here are fixed windows or storefronts. So it's always important to think what the finished product is going to look like. So this section here is going to be storefronts or fixed windows, and then this section over here is we're going to have sliding glass doors. But what I'm standing on top of right now is wood floors. So these wood floors are as high as the structure is going to go, or as high as the finished floor is going to go. So when we go to install the sliders, or whoever goes to install the sliders, those sliders are going to be about 1.5 to 2 inches taller than the finished wood floor. So once again, you can see that that's something that was not considered in regards to either raising the finished floor or preparing the slab for those doors to sit a little bit lower. So the threshold, you know, people as they're walking into the house, they're not tripping on these things. So as you can clearly see here, you have exposed rebar, which is never a good thing. And now you can see from the outside how pretty this looks. However, this is just superficial. This is not actually indicative of any reinforcement. There's also not any signs of any patches here on the floor, both where that steel plate sits, and then additionally here where this steel column is, where this column is, what we've typically seen is that we have to open up a hole in order to beef up the footing. That is not present here. So once again, you just have a contractor that came in, poured this solid. The structure itself might not be adequate for this additional weight in this very specific area. So what we could see later is cracking, some failures, things like that. So construction is not necessarily a linear process. Things are going to change. You have to adapt. Sometimes you have tight deadlines, so you do things technically out of order. So usually we don't like to stucco the exterior until the windows have already been installed. Now, let's just say in this case, and in the past I've seen it done before, where we could just install the windows and then just do the stucco here and everything's fine. However, in this case, because we have this issue with the rebar here, without a doubt, this whole area, if we were to take over this project, would have to be completely redone. So it's just time and money wasted where things aren't done correctly and addressed while they're working in it, or people just don't know what they're doing, or they were planning on concealing things. And what we're going to see in a second is a lot of concealed work where I can't tell you the conditions behind it, but there's a lot of signs that point towards what is most likely going on behind some of this concealed work. So this is a typical opening that I talk about and I warn a lot of homeowners about. And this is where I say that Bigfoot Windows and Roofing, because I'm a licensed general contractor, one, I have the know-how, and two, we have the ability to pull the permit and handle the work. We know exactly what needs to happen in order to repair these areas so that the windows can function the way that they're supposed to, because impact windows and doors are engineered to perform under certain conditions. Now, if the installation doesn't meet those conditions, then the performance of those windows cannot meet the specs to which they were designed for. So we have block that's been broken out, and the problem is that our impact windows and doors, we don't determine where those screws are. The NOAs and the engineer's design of these windows and doors are going to determine where the screws need to go. So some manufacturers are going to have a minimum edge distance, meaning that from the corner to the first screw has to be 6 inches. Well, look at that. So if I try to install a screw here, it's just going to be hanging. So typically the manufacturers are going to be anywhere between 8 to 12, once again, depending on the NOAs, which is basically the specifications that tell both the building department and the contractor how much spacing has to be between each screw in order for these windows to perform as they were designed. Now, as we go up, we see multiple sections. This is what I like to refer as false confidence. So somebody gets impact windows and doors where they think that everything is secured. However, you might have a screw that's just dangling in the air. And let's just say they put a piece of wood here, the screw would potentially feel like it's solid, but it's not actually attached to anything, and it's literally just dangling here. So what would need to happen here, and what we typically do, is we put a piece of wood here, we will cut this open, install rebar, and then we'll pour this solid. That's what's necessary in order to get a substrate that the screw actually binds to, because if not, once again, these windows are not being installed as per the specifications that are required in order for those windows or doors to perform as engineered, tested, and advertised. You can see here it's just very similar conditions. You can see it on both sides to where, once again, the screws would not be grabbing anything. And as we move down, we start to see a lot of concealed work. So here, I believe it's safe to say that based off this, these are decking screws, exterior decking screws, wood to wood. I don't know what they put in the structure here. And you can see in this whole run, there are not any screws. You have 2 Tapcons here. So what is this wood actually biting into? What is the window actually going to bite into besides this wood that's not really held on to anything? So as we talked about over here, you know, we talk about going from the foundation to the slab, to the column, to the tie beam, to the roof structure. Everything is tied together. My question would be, what is actually tied together here, tying that window into the structure, or that window into this piece of wood into the structure? And the answer, more than likely, is nothing. And that's what scares me. You can see more conditions here. You know, this wood has been installed. There are no screws here. We have a couple in here, but you know, there's not any Tapcons driving this piece of wood here. Bad construction altogether. And then on this side of the opening, we have some wood deck screws. Once again, I don't know what that spacing is. It might be every 16. So it is possible that there's a wood column here. This is hollow. I can tell that's hollow. So, you know, what is really grabbing this structure? Is this built to code? Has this actually been inspected? The answer is no, because they would have failed miserably. So now it's about to get really interesting. We're going to take a look inside. I'm going to show you some of the structural deficiencies that scare the out of me. This right here is another thing that absolutely scares me. I was just doing a quick walkthrough and I noticed this. So you can see these 4 pieces of rebar here, and that is your rebar that's part of the structure of your tie beam. So starting from the dirt, we have the foundation, we have your slab, your block goes on top of your slab, and then that is what supports the tie beam. Now, this little metal piece right here, what it was designed to do back in the day, and it's still used in some cases, when we pour our tie beam, this basically prevents some of the cells, which is what these holes, when we look at a CBS block, the CBS block will have 2 holes. Those are called cells. Now, new code will require that these cells, or some of the cells, need to be what are called filled cells, or grout filled cells. So that includes a piece of rebar coming up from the foundation through the concrete block all the way to the tie beam, and then this tie beam, when they pour it, this cell would be a poured cell or a filled cell, and that would be a reinforced cell. Now, what I'm seeing here and what they were about to do is put drywall, or we're standing inside of a shower, so they're going to put the Durock, Weedy system, Schluter system, whatever system it is, right on top of this. However, they were going to leave this cell unpoured. Now, what happens is you have a tie beam that's not sitting on top of a column. So this is just another clear indication that structural plans were not developed, or definitely not followed, as this tie beam is not being held, or is not sitting on top of anything substantial, giving it the reinforcement it should have. And it was just cut. And as you can see here, this is where the block wall was, and they pretty much just cut the beam, and we probably have the other side of the beam here. This piece of wood, as you can see here, was sitting on top of this tie beam. Now there's nothing necessarily reinforcing this. We have the weight of all this wood in the roof structure. We have the weight of this wood in this roof structure not sitting on top of anything. So once again, it's a major issue. Additionally, you can see there's a lot of termite damage that was here. You see there's a lot of damage to this wood here, and this wood should probably be reinforced. Also, wood screws were used in this case. I don't know that follows current building code. These are exterior decking screws. Once again, this is just makeshift construction that, you know, let's say in 10 years, somebody else buys this house, they have no idea the conditions of what's under, you know, call this a quote unquote beautiful bathroom in the future. You know, what are the conditions under the walls, behind the walls? And that's what makes buying homes scary when people are not using licensed contractors. Now, as you see here, this is the other side of the wall. This is all concealed, but this is our tie beam. And once again, it's just stopping here. You know, there's no sign that they went in and reinforced the foundation or this wall or this concrete behind this wall. So unfortunately, we don't really know what's going on, but you can see here that additional block wall was removed. So there was a block wall sitting here previously. Now there's nothing really holding this tie beam. Who knows how the structure is even reinforced currently. And as you can see, this contractor also removed additional sections of this wall here. And you can see what I was mentioning earlier, how we have rebar coming up that ties in structure to structure from the foundation to the slab, from the slab to the block walls. We have 1, 2, and there might be some additional rebar on the other side where we actually had a column or a filled cell at the very least, which if there's 2 pieces of rebar, it's more than likely a column. What was holding this up? So now we have probably 20 feet of unreinforced tie beam that's just floating in the air that's holding up the entire roof structure. So what happens during a hurricane and a family thinks that they're safe inside their home because they have impact windows, because they have a new roof, and that's just false confidence, which is absolutely disgusting at the end of the day. So this is probably one of the scariest things here. We have a lot of things going on in just one very small area. So this beam here has been cut almost completely through. We have multiple notching and holes made in this rafter right here. So that's scary in itself. This ledger board and this anchor for the ledger board is probably 1/2 inch into the concrete. So this piece of wood that is supporting these 2 rafters is not really attached to anything. This tie beam has been chipped out. You can see 2 pieces of rebar here. This came down into here, and this was probably a column that was supporting a lot of the weight of this rebar. I'm sorry, that was holding a lot of weight of this tie beam, the roof structure, everything. Additionally, we move right into here, and I can see that this roof structure, with the exception of this rafter, we probably have about 6 feet where there's nothing that this roof is attached to. So if somebody stands right here to do a repair, they can potentially fall through the ceiling. So that's pretty scary. On top of that, there's no strap attached to these rafters. The first strap that we see attached is all the way back here. And what do we see when we come back here? Another tie beam that was cut. We have rebar that was here. So previously we had a tie beam that probably went to here, that we had a tie beam that crossed this space, dropped down into a column, and major structural components of this house that are supporting this house, including the roof structure, are completely cut and disregarded. This is not a safe space for anybody to live in. And here we have another condition. Once again, we have our tie beam, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of rebar. Earlier, I talked about the sliding glass door, or I'm sorry, the opening over there where that rebar was exposed. You see here, this is where our tie beam started. And you can see how much coverage that rebar has. So this concrete helps keep moisture out of this rebar. When this rebar does get moisture in it, that's where it starts to oxidize. It'll start to move around and it'll start to break the concrete. So once again, this structure that was once a solid structure was just cut, disregarded. Now we have block that's literally floating in the air just by the mortar that is attaching it. This block is literally floating in the air, and the tie beam was cut again on this side. There is no reinforcement, no column poured here. Here, we might actually have a filled cell, but I want to say I doubt it. If I put a hammer and I hit the hammer against this, I guarantee you we have hollow block on the other side of this opening. So once again, there's nothing that is holding this structure in place. Like this can literally collapse right here. And now we have this wood here. I'm sorry, we have this hanger that's not attached to anything, just kind of floating in the air. More than likely what this contractor was going to do is just put a piece of wood here, attach drywall to the underside of this, and call it a day. This right here, Another pretty big deal. I know this is just framing. Can you tell the difference between this piece of wood and this piece of wood? Is that this is pressure treated wood, this is untreated wood, this is concrete. I mean, it's painted concrete, but you should never have untreated wood in contact with concrete. So in order to rectify this, you would have to basically pull this piece of wood off, replace it with pressure treated wood, or at least you have to replace this piece of wood and put it back. Once again, just showing you the level of care that was put in towards this home. Not only major structural issues, just basic code issues that were completely disregarded here. So we talk about certain window manufacturers that we don't touch. This window happens to be, I know who the manufacturer is just looking at it. So the manufacturers that we represent all have sweep locks on the window. These windows here that have these kinds of locks are so unsecure that it's actually very easy to unlock this window if I were to pull hard enough. So you're getting, somebody looks for hurricane protection. Somebody wants impact windows to protect themselves from hurricanes, give them a little bit more safety against burglaries, but yet these windows that actually do meet Florida building code are very easy to break into, and it's a far inferior product. A lot of homeowners don't know, aren't aware to ask these kinds of questions, what kind of locks the windows are coming with. These locks here are not substantial in order to really give you that additional layer of security that impact windows are being advertised as. This is just another pet peeve of mine. You have a contractor that's coming in here, not really caring for the existing conditions of the house. We have impact windows that were installed a long time ago, and they just completely disregard it and make a complete mess of it. Yeah, another thing that bothers me about these locks is that they slide up and down. Eventually, that tension that's here that's holding them in place will fail, and these locks will just always be down here. So it's nothing fixed in place. It's just something that moves. It's another piece or component that breaks. Over time, it'll lose its grip over here. It's just a bad system altogether. So in summary, a lower price might be attractive in the beginning. However, in this exact situation, we have a homeowner that is going to pay double, if not triple, to undo and then redo some of this work, reinforce some of it. So what a lot of people consider is just the financial cost. But what now this homeowner is dealing with is the emotional cost, the frustration of fighting with this contractor who's now disappeared with her money. She's fighting him. Now she has to go back and find another contractor that's willing to take on this project. And now that contractor is going to spend a lot of time and money using engineers, having to demolish, having to open things up and do a lot of discovery. And there's probably a lot of surprises that I was easily able to uncover, but there's probably a lot of stuff that's concealed or hidden that's going to cost more time, more money. So whether this homeowner was renting an Airbnb, whether she was living in a family's home, there's the amount of time she's losing, there's the amount of stress that she's losing, and on top of that, she's losing a lot of finances, now paying triple for something she could have spent a little bit more money on the front end, got a much better product, possibly be done with the project at this time, and on top of that, she could have been living in and enjoying this space a lot sooner versus going through all the headaches that she's going through now. She has to hire an attorney. It can be, things can turn very ugly very quick in construction. It's very important to talk to past references. It's very important to make sure that permits have been pulled on your project before work starts. It's very important to have great communication with the contractor you're working with. And without that, it can really cost you a lot more in the end than you expected.